Okay, today we are looking at spiritual denial, what it is and how to use it. Part one of a two-part series. And next week I'll talk about spiritual affirmation. Denial and affirmation are very basic concepts in the Unity teachings. And it is a practice that we are engaged in all the time. And what we want to do is be able to observe how we are using these ideas and how we can use them to our advantage. But the word deny has two familiar meanings. The first example is when a person refuses to admit the truth. Did you eat that last cookie? No. Although he did. And that was a question that often came up in our household when our kids were growing up. But the question usually was, did you eat all the cookies? And the correct answer would, of course, be, no, I just had the last one, you ate the rest. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. But that's one definition. It's, no, I didn't do this thing. I deny, that I did this thing. Whether it's true or not. The second one is to refuse to give something that is requested. It's a very different thing if somebody says, can I have that last cookie? And you say, no. You're denying them the cookie. And of course, we're not talking about cookies. Spiritual denial falls under this second example. But instead of cookies, we're talking about attention and power. So there are always things asking us for our attention, and where our attention goes, our power tends to follow. And so that's how we're thinking of this. It's a matter of denial in this sense is a matter of withholding our attention, withholding our power from a given proposition. The world is constantly requesting our attention. Where our attention goes, our power tends to follow. Someone has rightfully said, whatever gets your attention gets you. And I think it was Emma Curtis Hopkins who said, we have one thing to give, that is our attention. And when I read that at first, which was many years ago, it caught my attention, but I didn't quite understand fully what she was talking about. We have only one thing to give, and that's our attention. And I've often thought to put this in some perspective, if your attention was money, that wherever your attention goes, you're putting your money. You'll see quickly by what kinds of possessions you have where your attention goes. And what we think of instead is where our attention goes is it affects the way our life unfolds. It affects the kinds of things that we engage in, the kinds of things that we're interested in, that we give our attention to. And that's it's a very simple idea. But how easy it is, say you're talking to somebody, and somebody comes up, or you get a text message, and suddenly your attention goes from that person to whatever it is that gets your attention, that pulls your attention away. And that's one of the things we're recognizing is a challenge to this current culture, is the electronic attention getters, called cell phones or computers or whatever. And it's not a bad thing. It's just one that we need to be mindful of as it's occurring. Where do I live? Where am I? Am I in this now moment? Or has something pulled my attention away? And it doesn't have to be a cell phone. It can be anything. But whatever gets your attention gets you. So that's a thought that we should hold all the time, just as our self-regulating awareness of where our attention is, because it's very true. You can have in your life not one thing going on that is a problem. But you could actually give your attention to something that may have happened or might happen, could happen, and start thinking about that and build that up into an event, a mental and emotional event that affects the entire quality of your experience. We do this all the time. The question about that is, are we obligated to do it? And that's what we're looking at here today. We're given some potentially upsetting news. The more we think about it, the more upset we become. Have any of you had that happen to you where you were given some bit of news and you didn't think that much about it at first, but the more you think about it, the bigger it gets, and that's, I'm sure we've all had that experience. The situation is asking, would you give me your attention and power? We're saying, yes, it's all yours. And that is, we're holding a thought, and through the use of our mental emotional faculties, we start building on that thought until we start reacting to it and treating it as if it's something real. And we have become so good at this that we don't even realize we're doing it. It's such a interesting thing. If you look at your one of your pets, for example, they don't have this same ability. I don't think they do. They don't seem to. Our cats, we observe them, and they seem to pretty much know how to be in the now moment and stay in the now moment. And you know how quickly a dog or a cat, both, either one, or any animal for that matter, forgives you if you trespass some way, if you accidentally step on a toe or something like that. Everything's forgotten pretty quickly. But if it happens to us, we wonder why that person stepped on our toe. What's the message they're sending me? And we build up this whole scenario of ideas that probably have nothing to do with reality. But the animal doesn't have that ability. They don't have the imagination. They do have some level of imagination. I'm sure of that. They have creative abilities. If they know where the food is, they'll go there, and they'll keep repeating those kinds of things. They don't forget certain things like that. But if you ever watch a cat sleep or a dog sleep, and how easy it is for them to go into that mode and just totally let go. Don't we wish we could all do that at the drop of a hat? That's and the reason we don't do that often is we lie down, but our mind is churning away with all kinds of things. And to say, as we lie down, say, I'm not going to give my attention and power to these things. We actually have the ability to do that and to change what is going on in our minds. And one thing I have found that's helpful, I've been thinking about it more lately, is just to observe my breathing. And I will use the affirmation, I am. I'll breathe in, say I, and breathe out, say am. I am. And do it in a very deep and deliberate way, where I'm actually thinking about that. If you do that for like 5 minutes, your body completely relaxes. All the stress leaves, and your mind focuses right in this now moment. And that's a lot more important than we realize, especially when you realize that you're losing that stress and what carrying that around means. That's the thing that really interferes with the quality of our life. And where does that stress come from? It comes from not saying no, not using the principle of denial, of saying, no, I will not give you my power and attention to whatever it is our mind is going over. We tend to just let it run wild like a spoiled kid. Spiritual denial is doing the exact opposite. We say, no, I will not give you my attention and power. So what I would encourage you to think about today, anytime during the day, something comes up where it kind of starts taking you down, takes you down a road you don't really want to go, to become conscious of what's happening You've been given some information, or you start thinking about something, and it starts pulling you in a direction you don't want to go. And stop yourself. Stop that and just observe your mind and say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to give you my attention and power. And just see what happens. See what your reaction to that is. See if you can do it. See if you can pull yourself back. You know, we're talking here about a basic principle, something that any of us can do, but it's a matter of being mindful of the act of actually giving our attention and power away. When we're doing that, it may seem so normal to us because we do it so often that we don't think to stop it. We don't think that it would do any good to stop it. But you will be surprised at that very moment. You know, that comes back to Jesus saying, my kingdom is not of this world. This world is that one that's pulling my attention out there and, causing me to have an experience that I don't really want to have. But I don't seem to have any choice. But we do have a choice. That's the whole thing that we have to remember with the spiritual teachings, is we interrupt the old patterns. We interrupt the natural or normal responses. They're not natural, they're normal. A natural response is what we see in the animal kingdom. They don't have the ability to imagine all kinds of bad things going on. Their natural response is they deal with whatever threat or situation is at hand, and then they go on. They forget it. They move on to something else. That's a pretty inspiring thing to observe when you do, because they live in a world that we aspire to, and we think that we are, far above the animal kingdom. Well, we are, because we have this ability called imagination, and animals just don't have that. But I believe that prehistorical humans experienced life very much like animals do, not necessarily at the animalistic level, but that the spiritual awareness was the default. That was their normal thinking. What we do is we look at human development and we see it on an evolutionary path. We started out very basic animal-like creatures, and we have developed this wonderful thing called intellect. And with that intellect, we have produced all kinds of inventions, all kinds of things that don't exist naturally in nature. We've created a whole world, but we have also created a lot of problems for ourselves. And so we consider then the next phase in evolution is to overcome the intellect by becoming more spiritual. That's the next step, to become spiritually awakened beings. Well, I believe that we started out as spiritually awakened beings, and it was the development of the intellect that caused us to forget who and what we are. That we're not trying to develop something new. We are recovering, we're recalling something that is as common to us as it is to the wild kingdom. But we have lived in the intellect. We have lived by appearances. We have lived in a level where we're reacting all the time to outer things. Well, animals do that too. They tune into their environment. But it's a very different kind of thing. It's a very different, I don't believe that they worry. I don't believe they project like we do. And I can't absolutely say that is true for sure, but it doesn't appear to be true just in observing them. And that's, I think, why people like animals like cats and dogs and all, because it brings us back a little bit closer to our true self. To the default spiritual awareness that we all have. But I think that's a good way to think about it. It's not, the soul doesn't evolve. The spiritual dimension, the spiritual aspect of us does not evolve. The intellect and the imagination evolved. These are faculties that came later, that were developed later. And with the development of those, we shut off much of our awareness of what comes natural to us. And so that's what we're doing, is not trying to strive to a higher state, but striving to remember who and what we are at that deepest level. It's not saying that the intellect is bad. We absolutely need the intellect. We need this interface that we have. It's the computer software that allows us to function on this planet in a body. We need the hardware also. We need the body to do that. As long as we want to do it, we need the body and the intellect and the emotional side of ourselves, that mental emotional aspect of our mind. It's a good thing, but we don't want it ruling us. We don't want to be reactors to what's going on all around us all the time. So that's why the spiritual teacher teaches denial. Become aware of what's going on and let it go. Move on to something else. Spiritual denial is not the act of pretending the news we receive does not exist. I have seen that particular reaction with a lot of people. I've heard people say, I'm going to quit my job because God will take care of me and all of that, and they don't prepare for something else and move into an experience they're not ready for, and that's not always a good thing. We want to be present. We want to use the mind that we have. And so we're not saying that if bad news pops up, if a challenge pops up, that we deny it. That's not what it means. It means the challenge pops up and we react in fear. We deny the expression of fear. And we say something to ourselves like, that which is in me is greater than that which is in the world. I was not given a spirit of fear, and I get back to my center of power. That's what denial is. I'm not going to go down that reactionary road. We're saying that. We're making that statement. Not necessarily to the thing, but to ourselves. And it doesn't mean we're not going to handle the situation, not going to deal with it. Spiritual denial involves a definite decision on how we're going to use our mental and emotional faculties. So we ask ourselves, when was the last time I really was watching that? Watching how I was using my mind, watching how I was using my imagination. We usually just watch what's in the imagination, watch what's going on the screen of the mind. But how often are we aware of the fact that this is something we're generating? This is something we're choosing, rather than, I don't have a choice. This thing happened, so I must react in this way. And the spiritual teachings say you don't have to react in this way. You can practice denial. And that's not to say that doesn't exist. That thing is not real. It's not here. I will stick my head in the sand. It's not what it's saying. It's to observe how I'm responding to that bit of information, to that picture, to that event, whatever it may be. And how often are we conscious of how we're responding, and better yet, conscious of the fact that it's our choice. How we respond is a choice that we're making. And even more importantly, that we can make a new choice. We can make another choice. And that's the affirmative side. We can employ our faculties of imagination and faith to create a worst-case scenario that leaves us languishing in fear. Or we can say no to this temptation by refusing to visualize the worst and instead pour our faith into a brighter picture. And again, this is not just semantics. It's not just playing mind games. It's actually observing the feelings that you're having and getting to the point. I've shared a story with you before where I was in a very negative situation day after day after day. It was another church that I was in, and the church was being sued. And every day it seemed to get worse and worse and worse. And I would sit down and try to meditate and let this all go, and I didn't seem to be able to. And it seemed like the more I prayed about it, the worse it got. But one day I sat down and just suddenly knew it didn't matter what happened, didn't matter what way it went, that it was okay. And that's the moment that I found my center of power. And I realized that I was cascading downward through projection, not through reality. Because nothing in that experience changed in the moment when I said I'm not going any further backward. When I found my center of power, nothing in the actual situation changed. It kept going on, kept getting worse. But I changed. I had a whole different feeling about the thing, and I truly was okay with whatever way it went. And I learned a lot from that. We always wonder what we learn in a time of challenge and crisis. Sometimes it seems like we don't go through that kind of thing again, or we don't have to use the experiences that we learn. It's a matter of remembering what we pick up, what we learn in a situation like that. And that to me was it's not something you would wish on anyone. And I don't want it to happen to me again, if I can help it. But it was a very powerful lesson that it wasn't the condition that was the problem. It was the way I was responding to it. And I didn't think I had a choice. But something in me just let go. It rose up. It said, you're bigger than this. It doesn't matter what this does. You're okay. And that's a very powerful place to be. I regained my center of power. And my attention also started focusing on the brighter side of things. Evolution, or the changes we go through in life, sometimes everything falls apart and then it comes together in a different way. Maybe it's not even a way we would imagine. That's often the case. And what we react to is, I'm not expecting it to do that way. But if I'm saying, love dissolves everything that's not for my highest good and draws to me that which is, then I have to be willing to go through that. And the thing that was the highest good in that particular situation for me was finding my center of power. It wasn't any accomplishment of the situation itself or any resolution of the situation. It was the remembrance of who and what I am as a spiritual being, that I was giving control over my whole being to something I had no control over. But I do have control over how I respond. And so denial is a conscious activity. We have to be conscious of what we're doing, and when we employ this particular kind of technique. Jesus warned against judging by appearances for a very good reason. Looking only at the facts of a situation creates tunnel vision. In this universe of infinite possibilities, we home in on a specific few possibilities. The appearance demands our negative reaction. But are we obligated to give this appearance the attention and power it demands? That's where we begin to gain our spiritual control, is to say, this situation is telling me to react in fear. Am I obligated to do that? And the answer always is no, I'm not obligated to do that. So I stop pouring my attention and thought and emotion into that thing at the level that I'm doing, and pull my attention back and work at what we're going to be talking about next week. The answer, of course, is no, that we do not have to give this thing our attention and power. We will most certainly deal with the situation, but in a positive and constructive way. Through spiritual affirmation, which we'll explore next week, we remain in our center of power by directing our faith to the best and highest good for all concerned. So it's a simple idea, not always easy to implement, but it's important to remind ourselves that we always have that option. That when you find yourself being pulled away by something, being sucked into a whirlpool of fear and negative appearances and so forth, that to just pause for a few moments and get your attention on the now moment and say, I do not have to give my power and my attention to this thing in this way. And we will look at affirmative ways to make that change. But denial is the first step. Deny the power that you're giving away. Deny the attention that you're giving away, and pull it back into the now moment. Simple but not easy, as they say. Simple idea. But it's the reason lessons like this are important. It's just basic. It's fundamentals. Reminders of a very powerful tool that all of us have in our toolkit. We can apply it any time. Okay? Thanks again for coming out. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. If you'd like to help support this ministry, just click the donate card at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your financial support means a lot to us. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in Independent Unity, and have a wonderful week.